for being here today. This is our fourth our Missoula Community Advisory Group meeting, and we'll just kind of kick things off. Sam, do you mind starting the slideshow?
Yep, I'm adjusting my window, so I'm in the process of it. Sorry for the delay, Ben.
Sorry. Wasn't going to, but we can if would it be helpful to do a kind of another round of input intros? I know we're all kind of still getting to know each other. Yeah. Maybe we could just go around and just take a chance to introduce ourselves again, just so we can keep familiarizing each other, and maybe along with that, we're talking a lot about place and places in Missoula, so maybe one of your favorite places. So I'm Ben Brewer, planning supervisor with Community Planning Development and Innovation, and one of my favorite places in Missoula is the trailhead up to on the hill over here that was recently improved by the Parks Department, and it's beautiful and gives you a beautiful, easily accessible view over the whole valley. I love it. Thanks,
Brittany Palmer, I'm the Executive Director of North Missoula Community Development Corporation, and I feel like this summer I've gotten a renewed love for waterworks and then jumping in the creek at Greeno after. Keep doing that, and it's so nice.
That is Justin Metcalf with, and I'm primarily in affordable housing development. And I was driving through Missoula the other day thinking, wow, this is such a great city, and it feels like we're less frantic this summer than last summer. Like we can find this park and all these things. So I've had a renewed appreciation for downtown this summer, especially the river trails.
I'm Megan Robson, and I'm with the Prairie Real Estate. And I would say, I gotta love the trails, gotta love all the good stuff, but the unsketchiness of the Russell Street Bridge at this point in time is a huge benefit to our community. So it's much more stable feeling.
Unsketchiness. Alan McCormick, partner with Garlington Water Robinson. Waterworks Hill has been a crazy show of flowers this year, like rarely before.
All right.
Sentinel have something different. It's incredible that you can park at the end parking lot and get 15 miles of hiking and never hit the same trail twice. What a great asset we have sitting right there.
Emily Blacken, I'm a senior planner at CPDI, and my favorite place lately is this little swimming spot on the river that's across from Currents over McCormick Park. I live right near there, so that's my go-to after work. Jump in the river place.
I'm Ashley. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the community engagement specialist for CPDI. The Blackfoot River in general, but Johns Root Park is one of my faves. We were there this weekend, and I don't do the jumping off the cliffs, but I like other people watching other people do it. And the bravery of the little kids and stuff. There are always little girls that they're doing it this weekend, and there's up and down and up and down, and they're just oh my gosh, we're there for an hour just watching them, and we were like, this is great. So Johns Root Park.
I'm Kat Cowley. I use they and she pronouns, and I'm the director of the Basic Needs Office at the University of Montana, in our food pantry over there as well. Right now, my favorite spot is Missoula Public Library because it's awesome. It has air conditioning, which my house does not. And then Johns Road is also a close second.
I'm the Means manager for the planning section, and I use she, her pronouns. My favorite spot right now is also the river. A lot of rafting, probably not enough. And close in, it's so lovely to do something like that in the evenings, and the crowds really got down, but the days are getting shorter. So
Thanks, LaValle. On the internet, on the computer, Adam, you want to go next?
Adam Hertz. I'm a former member of City Council and a realtor and developer in Missoula, and I kind of missed the exact details of the icebreaker, but it sounds like it was our favorite spot in Missoula. I really enjoy the river around the Kona Bridge area, which is close to my house.
Thanks, Adam. Brian, you go through it next.
Everyone, Brian von Lossberg, former colleague of Adam's on council. I'm going to go with the simple observatory up on the top of Blue Mountain that's part of the university.
Thanks, Brian. Tim?
Hi, everybody. Toon Pham. I'm on the Consolidated Missoula County City Planning Board, and I realize I probably have never really introduced my day job. So I actually work remotely for a tech startup. And my favorite spot is I live up the rattlesnake, so that's probably it. Every time I'm up there, I feel like I'm finding something new. There's always something new to discover there. So, and apologies, I'm not there in person. I got tested for COVID this week.
Sorry to hear it, Tim. Hope you're feeling better. And thanks for being here. Sam and Peter, do you want to take a chance to introduce yourselves again? And if there's anything that you have identified as your favorite spots in Missoula so far?
Sure. Sam Suter, I'm owner of Meta Urban Design, and I'm the project manager on the consultant side of the team. Let's see, my favorite place, I really loved the library too. I was super impressed with how beautiful the library was. And I remember after a day of meetings, we all went out on the rooftop balcony and looked out over the view. And I just thought it was a really beautiful building and a great addition to downtown. So I'll say the library. Peter, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Park. I'm also on the consultant team, and boy, oh boy, that's I think we need to come back to Missoula to spend more time, because the 2 trips we were there, one, it was really cold, and so anywhere inside was my favorite place to be. And then the next time we had this lovely bike ride, and we saw so many different places. So I think we'll just have to come back, and I can better answer that question.
I think so too. Sam, do you mind advancing the slide?
Sure. And can you all see it okay? Is that showing up good for you?
It is. So this is our agenda for today. We have, as kind of a follow-up to the welcome portion of the agenda, we want to walk you through and just kind of update you on some of the engagement that we've been doing most recently around the project. And then we're going to move on to some a brief recap from last meeting, and mainly a chance to follow up on anything that came up for you, or any questions or comments that you want to share. And then the primary kind of main item for today is we're going to continue working our way and talking our way through the community forum analysis that Sam and Peter and their team have been doing, and moving on further into that conversation. And then from there, starting to talk through and try to think through this a framework that we haven't really talked about yet that looks at degrees of change. So that's what we're talking through today. As part of the just kind of our general update on engagement, I just want to let folks know that we've been and still are doing targeted discussions with stakeholder groups around the equity and land use audit work that we've talked about. We're talking about either, and as part of that, talking about either people's lived experiences with housing affordability, gentrification, or displacement, and segregation and exclusion, or talking with folks more in the industry about which principles for furthering equity and land use are supported or supportable. So just as a quick kind of rundown of that, since the last time that we met at the end of June, we've tabled for this project, with our Missoula project, at 4 of the city chats in the park events in Franklin Park, River Road, Maloney Ranch, and Bonner Parks, and participated in and helped facilitate a number of community table talk events as well, including at the Emmanuel Lutheran Church, the Riverfront Neighborhood council, which Bob is not here, I think, today, but I want to thank him for providing a location for that. Also, the All Nations Health Center, which also thank you to Thomas for participating and assisting with that. We met with the Missoula Aging Services, and we'll be facilitating another table talk next week with the Missoula Tenants Union and Bare Necessities. And thanks to Kat for helping with that. We're also hosting a North Side, West Side Neighborhood Council table talk next week. And that's in partnership with Common Good Missoula and as well as the Missoula Neighborhoods Department. And then we've also hosted 2 community virtual sessions that were kind of virtual table talk formats. And we'll be presenting to more stakeholder groups, including the Missoula Organization of Realtors board next week. And we met with the Missoula Downtown Association board. And we've also been holding conversations around this work with city groups and teams, including the Affordable Resident Oversight Committee. So our intention is to continue these types of outreach and engagement activities through the next week or so, at least as far as being focused primarily on the equity report and equity audit. And then we'll be moving on towards at a later date and later stage towards engagement around the upcoming focuses for the project. So is there any questions on that or anything you'd want to hear more about? We appreciate all the help that we get from members on this group and participating in those and helping put them on. And we're hoping that as we move forward that continues for sure. So that's the kind of the end of that update. This is also a time for any public comment before we kind of dive into the rest of our agenda. So if there's anyone on the call, I don't see anyone in the room here. Let me just make sure there's not anyone on the meeting that might want to speak. And seeing none, I think we can move on to the next item on the agenda. So this is kind of a chance to look back at what we've covered previously. And one of the things that we talked about at our last meeting were the recent changes to state law related to land use. And just as a quick recap on that, we kind of break that out into 2 main buckets. The first being the creation of a new Montana Land Use and Planning Act. It's a new legal framework for land use. That's kind of a major change that we will be just put this up here. So our intention is to comply with that with this new legal framework through the completion of this project. And then the second bucket, for lack of a better word, are a set of individual bills that change current laws around land use and are either already in effect or will go into effect soon. And we break these out, on this slide by kind of when they go into effect. Basically, there are some that are already active and then others that will become more effective by October, and then another set that kind of goes live at the end of the year. So for now, we just want to remind you that this is something that we're thinking about. We're going to circle back on this, and I think kind of plan to spend the majority of our time next meeting talking about our approach to how we are going to address this and comply with it, and then how it affects this project. So there's more to come on that, but just wanted to open this up to see if there's any comments or questions around these state changes.
This project is expected to be complete before the next legislative session.
Yeah,
So
that's
you don't have to deal with this.
that's the goal. Yeah, that's the idea. Any other questions on that? All right, if not, I'm gonna pass it over to Sam and Peter here, and they're gonna pick back up or walk through kind of what we talked about last month and then move on.
Thanks, Ben. So as Ben mentioned in the agenda today, we're talking a lot about community forum, and the primary goal that we have for our time today is to get clarity and confirmation from you all around what we're calling these existing place types of Missoula, and then we'll give you a sneak peek about where we're going. So when we start to actually use place types as a tool to plan, that's where I think it gets really fun when we're thinking about what this means for the future. So we wanted to recap what we covered last time and give you all a chance to ask any clarifying questions if something has come up, or just share any sort of thoughts or feedback that you've had since our last meeting. So to give you a quick summary and refresh your minds of what we talked about last time, we spent a few minutes talking about community forum. What is community forum? And we're defining it as the various ways that streets, blocks, lots, buildings, and green spaces are organized together to create these distinct patterns. We talked through these block patterns, which you can see up in the upper right of the slide. And then we talked about this in context of residential place types, just to give you a sense of how we're using these terms. We also went through the history of the built environment in Missoula and connected these different periods of growth with the block pattern that we still see on the ground today. So these are about each about 30% of the city grew in these different periods. And we start in the historic downtown core. We see this compact, walkable, regular street grid. As the city expanded out in the later part of last century, we see these curvilinear roads and cul-de-sacs. That's when the city shifted from this compact, walkable street network to more car-oriented development patterns. And then since the 90s, we've been in this period of trying to manage the growth. Are we still going to continue to grow outward? Your current growth policy says we're going to start focusing inward. So that's the space where we are right now, is what does this look like for the future? A couple of block patterns that I wanted to point out too, because these will be important today, especially this middle one. There are some farm areas that currently are existing primarily in the county area, but they have those large, what we're calling rural blocks, where it's about a quarter to a half mile per spacing between intersections. We also see these corridors where we have these commercial corridors, these large arterial roads, multi-lane roads with a lot of cars that are moving through the area. That's another block pattern. And again, that started showing up more as the city shifted to this car-oriented development. And then in recent decades, we're seeing this, what we're calling multinodal development. So it's new development patterns out in what we call greenfield areas that were typically not developed previously. But there's a sense of going back to this more compact walkable grid. So we're seeing these intersections spaced a little closer together. Again, so people or bikes or cars have a lot of choices. So we just call that a high degree of connectivity. So we also talked about what this means for our Missoula, and we spent some time comparing density and the current way that Missoula regulates land use and code is primarily by density. We talked about this as a quantifiable measurement. So for instance, you can see on the side here on the right, we're showing different configurations of 6 units, and we can call that blue square rectangle about an acre. So these are different configurations that 6 units per acre can take the different forms. So the top here is showing 3 different buildings with 2 units per building. The middle is showing 6 units in one building, and then the bottom here is showing 6 units in these small little individual houses. So we want to point that out. We updated this graphic since last time because we were talking about what does this mean? What does it actually look like? And that's one of our primary focuses in discussing form is how are these buildings coming together? What is the relationship between the buildings and the street? And how large are these buildings? And so we want to start to decouple density as the primary focus, because as the last bullet says here, density really, it doesn't create predictable building forms. So we want to start thinking more about the form, less about the number of units within the building. And that was one of the primary recommendations from the audit and land use study too. So that tees us up for this place type approach. So we mentioned last time that place types look at more than just land use and density. It looks at land use and intensity. What degree of mixture of uses are these areas? How large are the buildings? How many dwelling units are included in that area? It also includes form elements. What is the building? What is the relationship between the building and the street? How large is the building? What's the scale? What's the height? And then also available mobility options. We want to start connecting the private realm and buildings and private property to the street and how the streets are designed and what that relationship is. So that's really where places happen, is making sure all these elements are working together to create a certain space and a certain place. And so for purpose of today and where we are in this process, we're talking first about the existing place types of Missoula. Before we go into planning for the future, we want to make sure we all have a clear understanding of where we are, what the existing patterns are today, just so as we start to talk about how these areas will change and evolve over time, we're starting from a shared understanding. Last time we talked about the urban or the residential areas, and we looked at 3 different contexts: urban, suburban, and rural residential place types. We looked at the street, block, and lots and how these 3 different contexts vary. Again, the urban residential is more closer to downtown. It has this walkable, compact grid. As the city expands outward, you see these roads that are curvy, and in cul-de-sacs, we're calling that the suburban residential. And then again, the rural residential areas have these large rural street networks where intersections aren't very frequent, and it's very car oriented. So as we move from these urban walkable blocks down to the suburban and rural, the degree of connectivity and the shift in what we call modal preference changes from being multimodal, being walkable, to being car oriented. So that's part of the framework that we're using to just analyze and to explain the current patterns of Missoula. Then when we look at the block and lot pattern, we can see in the urban residential area, the lots are a lot smaller on the blocks. They're a lot more regular. A lot of them have alleys with front yards facing the street. As we move to the suburban areas, that's where we don't see as many alleys. We have driveways facing the street, and a lot of the lots are irregular and and they're larger compared to the urban residential areas. And then when we move to the rural lots, we get really large parcels, farm agriculture areas. There's not a lot of buildings compared to the more urban areas. Then in looking at street types and street design, these vary by the place type as well. And we looked through the different sidewalk types: the boulevard sidewalks, curbside that doesn't have that tree lawn, no sidewalk, or no curb or sidewalk as well. And again, that's related to the degree of connectivity and to what extent these areas are walkable or car oriented. And then lastly, we talked about how the building forms vary as well from these areas. So I mentioned that when we were looking at the lots in the urban place type, that's where you see the front doors facing the street. Garages and cars are usually access the site usually from alleys, so you don't see that from the street. And then as we move more towards suburban residential, that's where you start to see parking lots between the building and the street, or you see garages facing the street as well. So that was a quick recap of what we talked about last time. Are there any questions or comments that you have for us today about what we covered last time before we move to the new content? Okay. Peter, you want to jump into the mixed use place?
Sure, yeah. And so the new stuff today that we want to talk about is moving to the mixed use place types in this approach. And again, just to reinforce, we're talking about the existing place types. We're really trying to capture Missoula as it is today and introduce this approach to planning and code reform using the place types. So the place types we want to talk about today are downtown place types, there's one downtown, Main Street, and what we call commercial corridors. So the same sort of ingredients of land use, intensity, form, and mobility go into defining these place types. So the first one, in terms of downtown, downtown is a compact grid. Downtown's the most urban place in Missoula, and in terms of form, buildings, right? They come up to the property line. They define that street space. Ground stories have active storefronts. It's a mix of uses, right? People live and shop and visit and work in downtown. And it all contributes to creating a vibrant and active destination. And so it's walkable, it's bikeable, there are transit options, and there are cars, right? So it's not like it's an either or proposition, but that's downtown as a place type, and it's built on that compact grid. The next is our main streets. So these are the neighborhood scale places, primarily serving neighborhood uses, but again, a mix of sometimes residential over commercial or office over commercial or retail. And buildings are generally more human scale, and they fit in with the residential areas, and they're built on that compact grid again. And similar to downtown, in terms of mobility, right? The full range of mobility from walkable places, cars, bikes, transit. And in this case, in main streets, parking, well, there may be some small parking lots to the side of buildings. Generally, there's a high reliance on on-street parking. And the proximity, again, to residential uses is pretty close. And then the third type are what we call commercial corridors. And these are the regional and community serving places that are located along major corridors, highways. Some lead to downtown, most lead to downtown. These are typically car oriented. They have large parking lots between the building and the street. They're typically less walkable, and they're built on this different scale of streets and blocks, as you can see in the top right. Less that urban grid as a chassis, and the connectivity to the corridor and connectivity between uses is generally lower. The blocks tend to be bigger. And in terms of uses, right, this is where big box and medium scale commercial uses are, higher frequency of drive-throughs, and bigger parking lots. So those are the kind of three flavors of place type, of mixed use place types that we are suggesting as sort of the starting point of the existing place types. And so just moving into looking at their street and block patterns, again, now we're going down. So downtown, Main Street, commercial corridors. And so the downtown and the main streets are typically built on that chassis of that urban grid, of that smaller, tighter street grid with alleys. Parking, there is some parking lots, but for the most part, it's street parking, which is in contrast to commercial corridors, which is built on that bigger block, less connectivity, street and block pattern. And quite often the parking lots are a pretty big feature here. And they're much more auto-oriented. So in terms of building placement, So this is getting into the form aspects of buildings relationship, how they sit on a block and how they shape the public realm of streets. Downtown and main streets, built on that urban grid, typically street parking and high pedestrian activity. And these are the areas where structured parking are most likely to occur, right, in terms of the economics of the land. As you all probably know, right, a structured parking space costs a lot more than a surface parking space. And the economics of the land value in downtown probably is where parking structure makes any sense. To the in terms of the more car-oriented places along commercial corridors, right, the buildings are typically placed further back from the street. The streets are usually bigger, and between the building and the street, we typically have small, medium, large parking lots. In terms of the that parking, right? As I mentioned, downtown, that's where the economics make sense to do structured parking. Main streets typically rely more on on-street parking, and commercial corridors have, as I said, a range of parking lot sizes from small, medium, large. Right, so parking becomes, as it turns out, a pretty significant element in terms of defining distinctions of place, and they relate to use, of course, and the resultant building forms. So what we want to engage in now is just kind of a discussion with you all about this place type approach that we are proposing. On the right side, you see the residential place types that we covered last time, and the range of urban to rural, more walkable to more automobile dependent. And on the left side, you see the mixed place types that I just briefed through, from downtown, Main Street, and commercial corridor. So I guess the initial question is, as you think about Missoula, do these distinctions, do they resonate with you? I mean, do they make sense in terms of how different places around Missoula might be characterized?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was easy.
You nailed it.
Any questions or comments? No.
Yeah, of course.
How do you respond to existing corner commercial uses? You know, something that we might call a node.
So within each of these, there might be different flavors or different scales. So we would typically call those main streets, right? So even though they're not blocks and blocks, it might be just one building on half of a block on one side of the street. But if you think about it, that character, it's kind of like Main Street small, right? And then we might have a couple of different scales of Main Street.
I guess the question I have is I don't understand the question of
Okay.
Are we looking at trying to create a package to describe existing Missoula as place types? Is that what we're looking at?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
In that case, I think there's two missing. One would be light industrial, heavy commercial, such as the development park, portions of sort of the for lack of a better word, sort of like the Roseburg Forest Products Tank Farm, that sort of area. So that one's missing. And then Greenfields is missing. And we don't have a lot in the way of Greenfields, but of course, Justin's smack dab in the middle of one right now. And so some of that. So if that's the exercise of trying to identify the place types, those are the two that come to mind that could be added.
Greenfields also encompass, I'm thinking of, what's it, Benson's Farm? Like of still some agricultural use even in town. I think there's not a ton of that left, but there absolutely is still some here.
Public-private.
Yeah, we didn't, I don't know if you remember in the list. So we these are the 6 that we've sort of illustrated. The industrial and the employment are also on our list of place types. And then something that we call special purpose. So Sam, I don't, if you want to go to slide, I don't remember what slide that is. Slide, yeah. So yeah, those would be the other place types. I think they're a little easier to describe, but we haven't presented those in the same way. Right. So we've covered basically the mixed use place types and the residential place types. So yeah, so we've got to capture the industrial employment, and the special purpose are things like the airport, things like they may be open spaces, right? So.
Tung, looks like you had
Yeah, this is more of a comment, and it really comes to semantics, but I wonder if it's possible to come up with different terminology other than downtown and Main Street. I mean, you actually kind of alluded to in your last comment, which is Main Street like, and I think that one of the challenges for Missoula is that just geographically we're somewhat limited. So I wouldn't want to limit the kind of density that we have in downtown to be just what people have historically thought of as downtown. I see, for example, the Sawmill District is potentially being built out more like a downtown. And I think we shouldn't limit the terminology. Similarly, and I think that I apologize, I don't know who asked the question, but we're going to have lots of pockets of like slight small commercial that are what you're describing as Main Street, but they're very, very far away from a downtown or Main Street. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay.
Brian?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's missing, but I thought it's worth mentioning, and I can't remember if Brittany's there from NMCDC. She might be able to comment on this. So I live in the north side, and I think one of the aspects of the north side that may be missing is there was a robust distributed small scale commercial component that is largely not active anymore, has become residential. But another example, we're right across the street from a very large property that is part of Missoula County Public Schools, functions as a park. Head Start has been using it for school, but there was a big plumbing issue and they had to relocate. But it's a real central place within the North Side neighborhood. And then scattered around the neighborhood are places that used to be a local meat market or used to be a local grocery store. And you still got structures and forms that remind you of that older commercial element, but has been gone for decades. And in some cases, there's been attempts to sort of revive that. So I just wanted to highlight it. I'm not sure it's necessarily missing. I suppose it might be sort of a sub component of urban residential as I try and fit it in here. But it's an area that's seen quite a bit of development and redevelopment, and thought I would mention it.
Okay. So would you, so that area that you said, whether it was some commercial that is not being used, I mean, did it basically serve as the main street for the neighborhood at one time, but it doesn't anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure Main Street, but um, so quick story. Adam will remember when we were going through the water case, and uh, when the city was acquiring the water system, we actually had a water main leak out right in front of our house, which would never want to guess what the odds were of that happening. But the interesting thing about that happening was all sorts of folks that had lived in the neighborhood for a few decades came by because it was a bit of an exciting thing. And you started to hear these stories about, well, this building over here where the bus stop is was the local grocery store for the neighborhood. And this was the meat, there was a meat market, at this other place. And there was an effort, there was some thought during one point where some local developers that live in the neighborhood were gonna there was a vacant lot, and they were gonna, there were some plans to put in basically a small cafe and grocery store, something that I would liken to, like a Warden's downtown, but out here in the residential neighborhood. And I mention all of that just because of the excitement that was, really high all through the neighborhood for an option like that. And the running joke was we would have a place to go as opposed to getting in a car or a decent bike ride downtown or to, Broadway or the good food store even. Now we would have an option that was a little different than the Ollie's gas station, which has served as the de facto sort of
Yeah.
grocery store. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure why I'm going into all this detail, other than to say the character of the neighborhood is strongly influenced, even in its physical form, by old structures that were once
Yeah.
commercial structures and haven't served that purpose for quite some time. I know there's a strong desire pretty much throughout the neighborhood for a return to that. You see that in some of the planning that's going in to inform the White Pine Sash development area, neighborhood commercial. So it just doesn't, I guess my main point is it just didn't feel like I would say the North Side neighborhood is necessarily well captured in any one of these. It seems more like a component of urban residential with, an inactive but hoped for light industrial commercial aspect.
We've talked in the past about support around cottage industry or the small scale blend of really everything, little bigger than home occupation, but also and not impactive like industry, but more artisan based and also living. And so like some representation of that, I think, goes on in our older neighborhoods and especially along our railway corridors. And we've also been emphasizing adaptive reuse in code, but, struggle with it through some of our rules and, appropriate incentives. So I wonder if some of those descriptions or something that builds off of that cottage concept and adapting is a way to capture what Brian is talking about. And it is existing. It's maybe a form of a very small scale form of Main Street characteristics, but it's the street that's catching us up. So things to think about.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, if it is kind of specifically a maker district, right? It might be a version of industrial employment. It might fall under the category of a special place type. But I guess I'd like to dig into the Main Street a little bit, right? Because if you think of Main Street, there's all kinds of different scales of Main Streets. But in Missoula, again, these mean different things. So for those of you who are old enough, you think of Mayberry RFD and you think of the main street, right? It was pretty small. You think of a lot of small towns, the main street is kind of the only place of sort of that kind of commerce, right? And then, you know, you had a robust streetcar network in Missoula at one time, which gave rise to those small little embedded commercial areas that you have in neighborhoods, which so far in our travels people seem to like, right? People want more of. So I don't know. Is the term Main Street? Does it just sound too big to folks? And the reason why we talk about Main Street in different scales is, as planners, we say words like nodes and centers and things, and a lot of times folks don't like, do I want a node? So, you know, anyways, we're just trying to figure out what are some words that might resonate.
I can't get past the fact that your picture for Main Street is Third Street.
Mm-hmm.
So since we have a Main Street, I think you need to change the terminology because I keep picturing actual Main Street.
Yeah, I think
Gotcha.
Main Street could be conflated. I don't know if that's the right word, but since our Main Street is in downtown, I think that they seem interchangeable. Versus, yeah, I think kind of what's been coming up in this conversation is more on the like neighborhood commercial scale, or even somewhere in between what's being described for Main Street and a commercial corridor.
Adam,
Yeah.
did you have a comment?
Yeah, I like the term node or even district. I think one of the challenges that Missoula has faced with that concept is that it's not prescriptive. I kind of hate to say this as a developer because I like to be able to do what I want to do, but you know, East Missoula is a really good example, and that's not in the city limits, it's in the county. But I think East Missoula is really missing an opportunity to become kind of more of a node or a district because there's not prescriptive commercial development. Anything that's, you know, we've got and I don't know if I'm using the right term, but it's pyramidal in the zoning. And so because there's such a demand for housing, any commercial lot that comes on the market in East Missoula is going to become multifamily. And the mixed use thing just doesn't really work or pencil out. And so we're seeing East Missoula redevelop. I don't know if I'd say rapidly, but it's redeveloping. But watching that redevelopment, I just see a huge missed opportunity. I don't think we're going to end up with kind of the commercial node there that we need, because I think the land that's conducive to be developed into commercial is being developed into multifamily. And so, you know, that's just one thing I would put out there with all of this is that I know a lot of cities have kind of messed this up by requiring mixed use in, you know, throughout. And sometimes they end up with a bunch of apartments with vacant commercial space under it. But I think there are a few select node areas where the zoning really should prescribe commercial use, or we're just not going to see this development pattern.
Yeah. And so this will be a future conversation. But we are trying to distinguish between zoning and place types, because the first step in this is updating your growth policy. And so, you know, to your point, that's right. You need to have the tools, regulatory tools that will enable those kind of, you know, those kind of places, those kind of outcomes. The first conversations that the growth policy update is going to allow is to have the conversation of, again, we're trying to put out kind of a menu of place types so that when you engage with community, you talk about, well, you know, what these different areas are, and what you imagine them being in the future. What do you imagine it being? Remaining residential, becoming remaining residential, but more intensive residential, or, you know, evolving to having some neighborhood services within walking distance, right? And so, yeah, so we're just trying to introduce a kind of a menu of these place types that can be used to engage those conversations. If we do that, if we see an area that today is zoned 100% residential, and the planning process identified that, oh, you know what, at this intersection, at this area, in this area, folks wanted to see a node or center or a main street, then you have the policy foundation to put that on the map. And then when you get to the zoning part, then that's a place to apply a different kind of zoning that would allow that mix of uses. But we just find it just fundamentally a useful exercise to use the plan to have those conversations rather than it being a zoning conversation. So the zoning tool is just simply in service to the conversations you had about what the future of these different areas should be.
Brian, I just want to check. Do you have another comment or question?
Yeah, I'll be quick. I just wanted to, beat this to death like I usually do. But I wanted to concur with, I think it was Alan and maybe others, and I heard Adam mention sort of the node thing, which resonates with me as well. I had the same sort of issue using the main street in this area. And I just wanted to really encourage the team to take a look at, this is the way I will be thinking about these concepts, is trying to apply it in the area that I know the best. And, across the street, it's Whittier School. I'd encourage you to come out and visit it. It's often referred to as the Head Start School because it's not an active place used by Missoula County Public Schools now. It's being used by the Head Start program, but they had to relocate, as I said, because of the water damage. But I mention this because, to me, this is literally what I think of as a node within the community that is prime. It's ripe. It is what everybody in the neighborhood talks about is the future of this location. Its function as a school, in this case, the Head Start, though it's not doing that now. The park, the NMCDC does its, cinema nights all through the summer and fall up on the wall. It is the center of the neighborhood, but it is in desperate need. It's a structure that is in desperate need of rehabilitation. The school operation there. It's a beautiful old historic brick building with God knows $1 million or $2 million, I'm sure, of deferred maintenance on it. And so the concern, I think, is very similar to what Adam, maybe was describing, or at least the flavor of it, that this will just basically be scraped and turned into, multifamily housing, which is important, but we'd be missing a much larger role that this structure and space, this place, functions in the neighborhood. So good luck making sense of any of that. But I would really encourage you to, come look at this particular place, and I'd be happy to meet any of you. So thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Ryan, did you have a question? Comment?
Yeah, I don't know if this is off base, but what's been bouncing around in my head is there a bit of a missing middle? I'm curious what the consultants are seeing in like the Boise's, the Denvers, these fast growing areas for the trades type people. I'm thinking live work, as far as a place type, your plumbers, your electricians, your welders, even nurses, those sorts of folks. But where do they land in the urban setting? Because right now I built a house 4 years ago, and every single sub, from the concrete guy to the heating ventilation guy, came from Florence or down the Bitterroot. And I do think it's a problem for the cost of housing and the availability of subcontractors to build housing in Missoula. And so is there a way they fit into the urban setting as opposed to traveling from 30 miles away?
So I think, the way that we think about place types is we don't think about it in terms of place types that are specific to a level of affordability. I mean, I think so far what we understand in Missoula is right. You have policy foundations and ambitions to allow folks to live in more places in the city, right? And that's regardless of place type. That if I want to live in an urban residential or suburban residential or rural residential, that regardless of income, there are expanded range of choices. So we typically don't say, well, this is where people of certain income would live, and that's a place type. It really is, how do you create more diverse housing choices across the whole spectrum?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's a bit of gentrification. But are live works something that is happening across the US? Because in
Yep.
particular, I'm thinking of Canyon Creek Village was built out in 2005, and there's probably a dozen lots that have been sitting there empty, and it doesn't seem like it's really working necessarily. That's out on the expressway part of town. So I just wonder why that isn't catching on. But then you look at areas out on North Reserve, and it does seem to be working.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, live work as a, so if you're thinking like where I live is where I work, right? That in the same building, then, downtowns have always provided that opportunity. But here again, across the spectrum of place types, the live work use is not really a form. I mean, there are different building forms that we can provide or that, that can accommodate a live work opportunity. But we have live work in downtowns. We have live work along main streets. We have live work in commercial corridors, urban residential, suburban residential, rural residential, right? So it's not necessarily a place type. Typically, it really is expanding. The degree to which uses are expanded within an existing place type.
You have a question, Megan?
As we are looking at these existing place types, are we in the future going to be looking at how those place types are going to change in the future?
That's a great question.
The commercial corridor is going away. I mean, not going away, but like as these big box stores go away, like what's the plan for what those places look like?
That's a great question. And that was the next topic. I mean, perhaps we could move on to the next topic, and then we can go back and talk about the place types further. But that's exactly the utility, right? To set the conversation in the plan update, in the growth policy update, about, beyond what you've got today, which is land use and density, but talk about land use, intensity, form, and mobility simultaneously in defining what these place types are. And then next slide. How future street types also might be part of that, right? So, because it's in the public infrastructure, in the public realm, where a lot of that future change will happen just as much as it is on the actual parcels of land. So, some illustrations. These are examples from other places that we use, but we're just using them today to describe, exactly to your question. So what is the future? That's the process that you're in on the growth policy update, to engage communities in that discussion. And so there are sort of three levels that we typically use to talk about what we describe as the degree of change. And so one word, and words, as was mentioned earlier, right? It is semantics, and so we got to figure out what words make sense. But the first one that we think of in terms of the future is basically maintaining the place type, maintaining the character of what's there. So that's, minor to no changes to the infrastructure, minor to moderate changes to use and density. That might be part of it. And then in terms of building form and scale, there's minor to no change in terms of building form and scale. So it would be, for example, if we are on a commercial corridor like it's depicted here with large commercial development, buildings are set back from the street, there are large parking lots, that if the recommendation in the future for this area were to be maintained, it's not that new infill wouldn't happen, but the general character, form, and land use and scale of buildings would be the same. It doesn't mean that, a drive-through wouldn't show up on the frontage of that parking lot in front of that big building, and a Starbucks or a drive-through restaurant might show up there. But in terms of changing the place, it's pretty much maintaining that place. A next level of change we could describe as evolve. So there's minor to moderate change to the infrastructure, potentially, and there's moderate change in terms of the use and density. So what you see in the lower left there is you see some infill coming in that's beginning to change the scale and the form in terms of buildings, right? Slightly taller buildings. These new buildings are starting to sort of fill in the street and that street space, and moving to evolving it potentially, at least for some parts of it, to a more walkable, pedestrian, supportive environment. So that's kind of this middle range. And then another degree of change, the third degree of change that we can talk about is transform, that there's significant change to the infrastructure. So for example, here there are significant changes to the bike lanes being installed. I don't know if you noticed it, but Sam, if you just go back. So if you look at in front of this big box, right, there's not a street, it's a big parking lot. But when you have these large blocks, a lot of times the transformation of these areas to create walkable main streets, from big strip malls or big shopping centers to making a walkable main street and a mixed use environment, is introducing new streets, right? Breaking down those big blocks into finer scale of urban blocks that you might find downtown. And so this is an area that transforms in terms of the infrastructure, which helps support a significant change in the use and the density, and in significant change in building form and scale, right? So it may be what we describe as Grayfield, right? A shopping center, a big shopping center or a big shopping strip that evolves into a walkable urban main street. And the form associated with this more intensive scale of main street mixed use environment needs to have more infrastructure, streets and blocks, and more infrastructure for walking, right? So that's kind of the degree of change that can be part, and in this approach would be part of the growth policy update. I think we have a couple of the other examples. Or do we, Sam? Or yeah. So in this one, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, this one shows more of a urban center context, so it could be downtown or some of the edges. And we're showing it going from a maintain, like Peter said, status quo, more or less, minor to no changes in infrastructure, a minor to moderate change in use or density, or minor to no change in building form. And then we show that evolving with some additional infill, some moderate to minor changes in the infrastructure with, you could see the festival street in the back, and some additional infill on the side of the building, taking the space of a current surface parking lot and creating a space for people. Anything else on this one, Peter? Want to move on?
Yeah. Yeah, so in terms of framing the conversations for the growth policy in this approach, a place type, right? The first thing is to connect with the audience in terms of here's what we are today, right? We are an urban residential area, we're a suburban residential area, we are a rural residential area. And then have conversations about, what's the future? What's the future potential of this place? Is it to maintain? Is it to evolve? Or is it to transform? Right? And so these are just some descriptions in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the use, the mix of uses, and the density or intensity of those uses, the intensity of buildings, the form, scale, and height of buildings. What happens in the kind of the maintain scenario, the evolve scenario, and the transform. And we'll just say, like, one of the questions that we have for you is, does maintain sound too much like no change? Because the reality is cities change. Even though a lot of times people don't want things to change, they change. And your city is changing. And so does it even make sense to even suggest that a degree of change is that we characterize it as maintain? I mean, maybe it's just different degrees of evolution from low, medium to high, right? But we started with these words in some earlier discussions, and so we wanted to bring it to you to get some of your insights in terms of how some of these words might be used, or how we might characterize these.
I've seen it used with evolve, transform, and then a different word for the green field or gray field.
Mm-hmm.
It has a negative connotation to a lot of people, I think. Everything's always evolving.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, just that the state changed, right? The limitations on single family areas. I mean, that's just even if you did nothing but follow the state regulations, there'll be evolution throughout the city. So it's kind of hard to suggest that. And again, some cities maintain makes sense. People can get it. In other places, it's taken to mean, the planners promised us nothing would change in our neighborhood. And so if that's the perception that might be taken, we wouldn't use that word.
I think I'd echo what Justin just said, in that there is the missing category of green fields, but I like this a lot. It kind of excites me because the bulk of Missoula is built. We don't have a lot of green fields, and so most of our development and future change is going to be redevelopment of sites. Part of why our code right now does not work is it was adopted as if Missoula was a flat green field as a whole. And the form-based codes out by the airport are not working because they come from a perspective that one person owned all of that ground. They're not working because when you find out that multiple people are going to be developing in much smaller chunks, suddenly the transects and all that doesn't pan out. And so we have to develop a code that stops pretending like we're flat and green. Got to have a code that talks about degree of change, and the code that then respects that. We don't have a single situation that fits neatly into a modern, or not a modern, an existing current zoning ordinance. And one quick story today, before this meeting, I had a meeting to take 9 duplexes and convert them into townhouse form. Can't do it because they've been there for 50 years, but they're duplex front to back. So the back units all face what is effectively an alley. Guess what? Our code says all townhouses have to face a public street. So I can't convert to create 18 housing ownership units. My client now has to sell them as duplex units for $750,000. When they could, by changing the form of ownership, sell individual units to it as attainable housing at $300,000 to $350,000. That's not degree of change. That's a code problem that's preventing a form of housing that just doesn't make any sense. And so I'm excited to talk about degree of change. And I know I'm putting the cart before the horse, though, of saying, I want to get to the point where we have an ordinance that respects that it's going to be change in a situation that is not neat and simple.
Mhm. And I'll say that because you're doing the policy update and what we're proposing as an approach would sort of sets the table for those conversations. In our experience, it's easier to talk about those difficult, have those difficult conversations when we get to the zoning part of this. If it's primed with these discussions of both the place types and right what the degree of evolution or degree of change is, because there are times when like in that transform that it is a significant change. Talk about it at the planning level with the community when the developer's meter isn't running and a whole army of consultants are getting paid by the hour, and have that conversation about the future of an area with property owners and the neighborhood, so that you can apply a new zone there that would enable that place type, that evolution to occur, and get that work out of the way so that the developer does what developers do, which is develop, right? Rather than having to go through a long negotiation and a rezoning, for example. I mean, that's where you sit right now in terms of the advantage of updating your growth policy and your code, is that connection between the expectations of what the future is going to be as it's established in policy and the changes in the code to enable it are going to be kind of done in the same breath. Well, at least consecutive breaths, but
I think there's several of us talking, two of us talking, that we don't care for the word maintain, but we're not, I don't know what the right word is.
Well, because if
Yeah.
that category is minor change all the way through, maintain to me doesn't sound like change at all. I heard one of you say improve down there, and I think I heard one of you say you don't want to make it sound like it's bad now.
Well, but
It is.
we don't want to make it sound like improve is, supremely positive.
Yeah.
It's like, why don't we just improve all the way through? And it's like,
Yeah.
no, we are gonna have to transform. Like, improvement isn't entirely just the only option, because you can make slight changes to make something that's not working a little bit better, but really you should try to make it work.
Does it make more sense to just have it on a scale of evolution then? I think that's where you started, of small to large steps in evolution.
I did find one that's grow, evolve, transform.
I was thinking grow too, but, grow.
But grow
seems-
is the whole thing.
Right.
Renew, I was looking up synonyms and stuff
Renew
too.
is good.
Renew, refresh,
Sourced.
that's just a synonym of something. I'm just looking up synonyms.
I also kind of like the three areas, or at least leaving transform, because if it were on a scale, it might be like, oh, we're gonna be off the rails,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
that
yeah.
might freak people out.
Yeah. Oh,
So if we think of an area of town, which is most of the geography of the city, right, is residential, and most of it is low density residential, right? And so, an area that's primarily a single family use, and the scale of buildings, right, are houses. And so if the degree of change is like what we're calling maintain, that doesn't mean infill won't happen. That doesn't mean duplexes and triplexes won't happen, right? Won't come in. And it doesn't mean that, you know, yeah, it's not pouring amber over the neighborhood and nothing changes, right? And so that is part of our point about like maintain might be misunderstood. But it's also one of those things where if we call it grow, then it can make people nervous too, right? It will grow in density, right? Again, the main point of this is in terms of form and scale, that it's pretty minor in terms of its change. So while the use might be more moderate, the mix of uses, the density of uses might increase, the diversity of housing might increase. In terms of the general scale of things, it isn't going from, you know, single family detached houses to 300 unit apartment buildings. Most people, that would be a pretty significant change, right? It's really going from single family residential, single family houses to a range of house scale multi-unit buildings potentially infilling, right? And that could include accessory dwelling units, that could be duplexes, that could be conversion of really big houses to duplexes or triplexes. That could be the introduction of new infill, but it's not necessarily redevelopment of a neighborhood, right? It is more infill. Evolve probably begins to introduce that idea of redevelopment more, and certainly transform. Transform could be significant redevelopment, but it also could just be significant new development of a greenfield. Right?
Who is not going to pick maintain? You go into any residential neighborhood,
Exactly.
they're all maintained.
Brian, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I also think there could be more creativity in the language under transform, like if people just see a significant change on this part, and this part, that might turn folks away from, like the images you showed, I think were really more helpful than just reading those significant change 3 times.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Brian, I just want to make sure, do you have a, you have your hand up, do you have a thought? If you do, just say the word. I guess I have a question, Peter, or a thought that may, and it's a little half baked, so I don't know if this has bearing or not, but I'm just looking at this. It seems like, is there a tie-in of degree of change to the existing place types or places?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, there's first the conversation about the place type, and then what is the degree of change? And so sometimes it's actually shifting from one place type to another place type.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So you could imagine it's a rural place type today, and someone buys a big chunk of land and wants to create a new urban residential place type and a main street place type, right? So this is what we see happening all over the country, right? Where there's a big chunk of land that becomes basically kind of a mixed use walkable new urban neighborhood, right? And there's a main street that becomes the center, the node, right? Might be called main street, may not, right? But the place type is that the promise here is that there's going to be this main street, this node, and there'll be a range of urban residential that will fill in and around it, right? And so, yeah, I mean, that would be a jump in terms of the place type that is taking its lead from a degree of change that would be, as we're using it now, a transform, right? Same is true on a commercial corridor. So if a commercial corridor today, a really deep commercial corridor, it could transform into that walkable urban Main Street and, you know, urban residential neighborhood surrounding it. It could evolve to something that maybe it's not quite a main street, but it's still a commercial corridor that is, rather than just single story, single use boxes and surface parking lots, it evolves to multi-story, not tall, but multi-story mixed use, right? But it's still primarily a auto-oriented corridor, right? It might evolve a little bit more to more walkable, but it's not a significant transformation as something else might be. So there can always be this shift. I mean, and again, that's part of the. It gives you the tools to engage community, and because like people look at what's out there and they just say, how could it be anything different, right? It's always going to be this big auto-oriented arterial. How could you imagine putting houses there? Who would ever live on that? And it kind of depends on, well, how you imagine these places to change, how you imagine them to evolve. And it's not just going to be zoning that does it, right? So as you move on the scale from least evolution to transformation, as we say here, that in terms of transform, it's not a change in zoning that's going to suddenly give you this Main Street environment. It's going to probably need to include new streets and blocks, public spaces, new infrastructure and in mobility, right? To take a 10-acre big box site and make it a 10-acre mixed use neighborhood.
I have a question. Maybe this is what Ben was getting at. I don't know. But just thinking of the conversations that we've been having around the equity and land use audit and gentrification and like development in certain neighborhoods and kind of evolution, I guess you could call it, that people are experiencing, whether they like it or not, and if there's an opportunity to like connect these ideas that, and I mean, I don't know, this is also not a fully formed thought, but I think what we're hearing is like people feel like this evolution is happening to them, especially in certain neighborhoods that they don't want. So maybe the angle is like, what would you want to see? I don't know, just thinking of a connection to back to equity for these terms.
I like that idea of finding a way to explain this that's more participatory. Because maintain, evolve, transform, to me, reads as this is happening to you and not you are involved in this as part of the people who are being affected and as part of the agents who create the change, whether it's from the homeowner, renter, or developer standpoint. And if the goal here is to use these to facilitate discussion, I think it's a lot easier to facilitate discussion if it's not, this is happening to you, but rather, how do you hope to be part of this process? That being said, I don't have better words.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
But just thing that's coming to mind for me.
Yeah, so in terms of the public engagement side, it would be, right, providing this menu of like, let's talk about, and we go a little bit deeper. I mean, this is just at the very high level, but it also allows you to engage in these discussions about trade-offs, right? And so who wants to see more affordability in Missoula? Raise your hand, right? Is anyone not going to raise their hand, right? But if we jump straight to zoning topics like parking and housing affordability, right? If you say, who thinks we need to have more parking, or who's willing to reduce parking, You know, like, are you crazy? How can you reduce parking? Well, right now you have a situation where your parking requirement might be getting in the way of your ability to provide more housing and more affordability and more affordable housing. So if you had the opportunity, how would you choose, right? And that's fundamentally the trade-offs question is something that is going to be part of needs to be part of, you know, what we'd recommend you include in your planning conversations. And Emily, each of those get nested in this question of what gets presented in terms of degree of change, right? And it's, yeah, I mean that's kind of the menu I think that you start with. And obviously each one of these, it's not like there's one degree of evolution or there's one degree of transformation, right? That there are different ranges in terms of how much change. But what we find is when we in the public engagement process, when we start this way to say, hey, it's not everything's going to change overnight. It's not going to change dramatically. But now's the time to have your say in talking about, well, what are your values? What are the community's values? And how do we accommodate these kind of opportunities? How do we provide more opportunities for more people in this context of how these places that you know today would evolve, could evolve?
We just have a minute or two left here, so probably need to wrap it up pretty soon. Sam and Peter, is there any kind of final any thoughts? I think we wanted to share this just with the group to give you a bit of an indication of where we're headed from here, and that we're still looking at continued and upcoming engagement around equity, and then this forum conversation, place types conversation with the community through the summer and into the fall, and then we are working on putting together these near-term code changes, and I think that's something we need to talk about with this group as well. So that's probably going to be our focus next month, and all of this is kind of headed towards a broader conversation about where we're going and scenarios for the future. And
right.
That's all.
So yeah, I was just gonna say the scenarios are where we will be putting in some of the analysis that we presented to you before and combine it with this. That's what the city chooses to do. Combine it with the place types as the conversation starters in the public engagement.
Just one other item, and if anyone needs to go, you're welcome to take off. I did want to check in. We've gotten some ideas and requests for kind of more information or more of a primer or overview or some resource for terms and just kind of understanding development and zoning more deeply. And I just wanted to check in with the group and see if that's something that people would find, just generally, if this group would find that helpful to spend some time in this meeting to look at together, or if that's something that we could kind of think about putting together kind of as a supplement, or find a time outside of this put some time too. So if you have any thoughts on that now, or just kind of following the meeting, just follow up with me. We're thinking about how to put that together and kind of land on what the best approaches.
Something that I thought that could be helpful that we've thought about putting together is like case studies for like when a developer looks at a piece of property, like why, like the townhome thing that Alan was talking about, like why can't you subdivide, you know, or we were just recently going through a property with a developer and the parking had to be front loaded, and it's like that kind of stuff could be like just showing a few case studies of, it's not taking away your parking, it's making, you know, certain things easier, or just like showing, like demonstrating the challenge of these kind of small infill projects that could be really tastefully done, that aren't burdensome on neighbors. But I think that would be really cool, and I'd be happy to help work on something like that, to maybe either for this team or more likely for like community.
Cool, thanks, Brittany.
Some of that, because I'm coming at this from the kind of opposite end of where I think most people are. I'm helping people who are desperate find housing rather than like inventing new housing for them, which if I had the money, God knows I would. But something like that is helpful because it puts the big terms and codes and zoning rules into context. And I think that's the piece that I'm missing, is that I'm not the person who sits down with developers and I'm not the developer. So or like if I could even get the dictionary to load on my phone, being able to Google terms would be helpful to me. I'm coming from a set of very different contexts and definitions. So that's been my struggle and barrier to participation this whole time.
Great. Thank you for that.
To Brittany's point, I think it'd be really interesting to look at some projects where variances were requested or where they requested a zoning change or something, and to understand what those variances were and how that shifted or shaped the project.
So an exercise that we're doing right now, just internally with staff, and I want to speak for Sam, but might be opened up to this group about a code audit report, is having our staff go through the different codes that they work with and highlight, just kind of, or shine a light on the top things that cause barriers to being able to, similar to what you were talking about, like what are the roadblocks to completing projects. So I could foresee that being a future conversation, maybe. Looking at you, Sam.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what we try to do in that process too, is illustrate these examples where the code is supporting something that might be counter to the change the community wants to see. And so that's usually a really valuable part of the process, when we can show what the code requires and then show possible other scenarios that might be more in line with community values, but might be currently difficult to do with the code. So that's precisely where we're going with the code audit work that will be coming up in the future too.
That's awesome. And to your point, Kat, I know that code is jargony and
Yeah, it feels like French.
Yeah, it's complicated and convoluted, so we have to think about how to translate it into like non-robotic English. Yeah.
There's also no bad question.
Yeah, I mean, so it's hard to keep up to know when I can.
Absolutely.
The amount of acronyms that I'm.
On campus and meetings, we use the jargon to wrap and just throw that.
I love that. Yeah, please do that.
You can also just make sure you're sitting next to somebody who knows it, and then you can just write notes.
Yeah.
What is this word?
Yeah.
I'm gonna let folks go, but definitely keep talking after this. But thanks everybody for coming today.
Okay,
We'll look
thanks,
forward to-
everyone.
Thanks, guys.
I'm so excited.
I think we stole it from Portland.